Thanks, everyone. All right, we are going to begin our open session regular board meeting, and I'm going to go back to the very beginning. Isn't that from The Sound of Music? Back to the very beginning. A very good place to start. Okay, so I know it's the theme of the week: singing and dancing. Okay, so the board will have a 10-minute public comment period at the end of each agenda item. Public comment after each item will be limited to the agenda item topic. There will be an additional opportunity for statements from the public for items not pertaining to a specific agenda item at the end of the open session meeting. Individuals wishing to speak at a board meeting should complete and submit a speaker request form that are in the back and submit that to our CEO or any CalSTRS staff. Each speaker is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes for his or her presentation. If there's not enough time for speakers to have 3 minutes, the timing will be at the discretion of the chair. The Teachers Retirement Board meetings are live web streamed and video archived, which are available to the public on calstrs.com. To protect the privacy of minors who wish to address the board, public commenters under the age of 18 may address the board, but CalSTRS will not live web stream or video archive these comments. Public commenters over the age of 18 may be recorded and included in the web stream for this meeting. Members of the public may speak to the board during their allotted time, but audio or visual recordings from a third party are not allowed due to copyright issues. All right, with that said, Jennifer, can you do a roll call for us? You're already.
Here. Ms. Dillon?
Here.
Mr. Keeley?
Here.
Ms. Higa? Here. For the State Treasurer, Mr. Rufino?
Present.
And for the Director of Finance, Ms. Miller? Here. Chairperson Hendricks, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. And we're going to go back to item 1 since we didn't do this yesterday before our workshop. So that's the approval of the committee agenda.
Move approval.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great. We have
Sorry,
an
Madam
approved
Chair,
agenda.
you may want to adopt that with flexibility.
Thank you
given
so
the-
much,
the
General Counsel.
Chair of the
That's-
day.
that was in my
Brian Berto. Adopt with flexibility. Do we don't need to vote again, right? Or, okay, good, okay. No disagreement, not seeing no facial expressions expressing a disagreement. We'll move on. Thank you. All right. And I would, with that flexibility that Brian so graciously reminded me about, what we're going to do this morning is we're going to start off as we typically do with the 3 action items, items 3, 4, and 5. And then we're going to go ahead and go to item 13. We have, which is a consent action item. And then we will go back to our informational items, starting with item 6. Okay? Everybody clear on where we're headed? Great. So with that, we will jump right into item 3. Julie Underwood is here to walk us through the 2020-21 operating budget, and this is an action item for today. So Julie, good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. So before I get started with discussing the proposed operating budget, I did want to advise you that CalSTRS has received from the Government Finance Officers Association a certificate of recognition for budget preparation for our fiscal year 19-20 budget. And so this is the second year that we've submitted for and received that award. So I did want to send thank yous to staff who worked so hard and diligently to produce award-winning budgets for this organization.
Awesome. That's great. Well, awards for budgets. Who knew? Great.
Okay, so turning to TRB 12. At the bottom of the item, at the September board meeting, we presented to you the preliminary operating budget for fiscal year 2021. And that budget was prepared for you in support of the strategic plan that you've approved. And it was presented in the amount of $361.7 million. Now that included, in the presentation, we provided you with detailed information for the increases requested compared to the prior year. And that included a net $47.2 million for the Pension Solution Project and $24.1 million for organizational growth. And included in the growth is increases for staff salaries and benefits, contract increases, as well as a request for 30 staff authorized positions. And those 30 positions would be spread over 10 different business areas throughout the organization. Now, also included in that presentation included 2 technical adjustments that don't have a budgetary impact, but that was for a drawdown of 5 investment positions to close out the multi-year investment BCP. And it also included a request for a reclass of 48 blanket positions to authorized classifications, and those positions have already received budgetary authority in prior years. So now, if you could please turn to TRB 13 in the middle section. So since September, we have received refined estimates, and we're revising the proposed budget, actually increasing it by $3 million. $3 million. And that's for state mandates. And included in that amount is additional increases for staff salaries and benefits, and that's pursuant to recently collectively bargained union agreements, as well as a refined estimate that we received from the Department of Finance for our pro rata assessment, and that is for centralized administrative services that they provide to CASTRs. Now, in addition, in this budget before you, we have a request to early hire 3 SIS positions, and that is in the amount of $263,000. And that is to address immediate workload needs in that area. That's for them to advance their ESG factors across in the entire investment portfolio, as well as analyze the low carbon transition. And that is in alignment with the priorities of the collaborative model. So if you turn to TRB 14 at the very top, the proposed budget before you today is in the amount of $364.6 million. And as we've done in prior budgets, your approval today will also authorize up to 3% of the support appropriation savings that will be available for an additional 2 years. And that's only if unexpected expenditures are happen, and that would only be upon additional approval by you. So you would have full transparency for what those unanticipated expenditures would be. Your approval today would also authorize up to an additional 5% above the baseline budget to be available for the Teachers Deferred Compensation Fund, and that would be to continue to grow the program should additional revenues be received in that program to grow it even further. So if you go to TRB 22, that is really the formal proposed budget. It includes all the information we've discussed with you in September, and it also has been updated for the $3 million request in state mandates. And it also includes for you detail by fund, branch, and by category in the appendix section. So I thought I'd stop there and ask you if you have any questions.
Any questions? Gail?
Thank you, and thank you, Julie, for the presentation. Obviously, some of this will go through the state's budget process, and there'll be some discovery there. But I do want to talk about the workload capacity management and the 30 new positions. If you can talk a lot about that just in the context of sort of the overall expanding capacity, making sure we have the capacity. I think, eventually it's all going to come together in terms of what we're looking for in the collaborative model, making sure folks are compensated, making sure we have, however we define internal equity. So I just want to make sure it's all part of that same story. And that is, obviously huge increased workload. But that is an addition. So 2 questions. One, kind of what is the capacity management you're looking for in terms of workload? And just to verify that it's separate and apart from non-discretionary costs and the pension solution budget, because that's a completely separate item and also separate from the building.
Yes,
Thank you.
the 4.5 million for workload capacity is strictly for the cost of those new positions. So it does not include any additional cost for pension solution or non-discretionary costs. So it's completely separate to support those 30 positions. So related to your
And
question,
specifically, the capacity will serve what areas of the organization?
for the 30 positions?
Yeah.
So if you turn to TRB, give me a second,
I think it's 18.
it's at the very end.
Yeah.
TRB 55. This lists for you the 30 positions, what business areas they will be working in. So On TRB 55 for Office of General Counsel, there's 6 positions. On the next page for Human Resources, there's 5. Next page, Financial Services, there's 4. Procurement, there's 3. Facilities, 3. SIS, the 3 that we talked about to early hire. Actuarial Resources, 2. Public Affairs, 2. And Executive Office, 1. And out of all of those positions, 8 are related directly to supporting the collaborative model, although there's 1 additional position in Human Resources that we could probably say is going to also partially assist with helping with the collaborative model. So I guess I'd say 8.5 is full-time for the collaborative model. The rest of the positions go to support the organization for the increased workload. A lot of it has to do with the initiatives in the strategic plan that the board has approved to ensure that we have enough resources available to accomplish those initiatives.
Great, thank you very much.
How about you, Gail? You good?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from board members? I see no more questions. So are we ready to, so Julie's asking for approval of this item of the
Yes.
budget for 2021. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?
I'm going to abstain, Madam Chair.
Okay, so. Was there a motion? Oh, sorry, did we make, did we not make?
I'll move it.
Okay.
I'll move approval of the-
See, this is, I'll need the team today, I think. It's been a, thanks, go ahead. So you made a motion to
I
approve.
move approval of the item as recommended.
Okay,
Second.
it's been moved and seconded appropriately. See, we need you still. Those in favor say aye. Opposed, abstentions. Great. Oh, and so you saw DFF abstain, Jennifer? Thank you. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
You got the abstention? Good. Okay, thank you. All right. Item 4 is considerations of board-sponsored legislation and regulations. Grant and Joycelyn, good morning.
Good morning, good to see you.
Good morning. So this is the, every November is when we come to you with proposals for sponsored legislation. And so I'm going to turn it over to Joycelyn to explain the proposals that we have in front of us.
Excellent. There are 2 proposals in your board packets, and then also I wanted to provide an update on the closeout to the 2019 session. But starting with the first proposal on a CalSTRS individual retirement account, this proposal seeks to provide additional low-cost retirement options to our members and other school employees. Of course, the main idea of the proposal is to authorize the board to provide traditional and Roth IRAs to those individuals and their spouses. And this would allow the ability to roll over from other eligible plans. There could be contributions made otherwise, and this is helpful if anyone is interested in end-of-year tax contributions or contributions for tax purposes. And also when there's required minimum distribution, then this is a product that they could use to move that money into. Currently, as you know, we do offer 403B plans and 457B plans. We do have the authority to offer a Roth IRA specifically for rollovers from 403Bs, but this, of course, would broaden that pool of options to our members to increase their retirement security, which is, of course, always a goal of our board and CalSTRS. Of course, and you may ask, what concerns or opposition would we face if we move forward with this? And so I just want to bring to your attention that we anticipate opposition from the industry that already offers IRA products concerning the additional competition for potential participants that we already have a connection to. And so we'll, of course, work to describe the benefits to our participants of continuing to work with our plans. So any questions on that one?
Yeah, Lynn.
Thank you. I'm just curious, have you done any studies about the demand for this type of product from CalSTRS members and how you would plan to market it?
So I think that our retirement readiness staff on kind of an anecdotal basis often hears from members who have their plans with us in 403Bs or 457s, and they're expressing a desire to move to an IRA of some sort, especially when they retire, because their 403B plans and 457B plans are still connected to their employer. So now that they're retired, they have less of a connection. So we often hear about, can I roll over to an IRA? Do you have an IRA for me to use? I'd like to make those contributions for the end of year tax purposes, or I'm hitting age 70 and a half. And so we don't have anything to offer them, but I don't think that there's been an exact count of how many times that's happened. But I think the retirement readiness staff has done obviously a good job to increase participation in the 403B and 457B plans. And so it's along the same marketing lines, I think, that they would approach it.
All right, thank you.
I'll get back and add, Justin. I think you can see that the industry also shifting from all the time they've spent on accumulation of assets now around distribution issues. You can just see how the literature is changing, how everyone is focused now on giving people the best advice around distribution. And so this is part of that discussion, is the best way to get your assets. And a lot of companies, of course, want to retain assets for obvious reasons. We're not a for-profit company, so our desires here are just what's best for that person's retirement. But, in other environments, people are trying to keep the assets in there for asset fees. So I think we want to continue that role of being the good guy in the market and make sure that we kind of position ourselves as there's more competition on these distribution issues.
And would you imagine that the CalSTRS fees would be lower than competition?
To the extent, well, it wouldn't differ from what we're offering on the active side. So yes, in that sense. The problem is when you release people from their employer relationship and just put them out in the open market, the likelihood that they're going to do the proper market research to get the best products is, of course, a challenge. So it's even I guess a more dangerous proposition in the IRA market that people aren't being careful enough on fee structure. So they're getting that assurance from us of a continuation of a good product. I don't think this is necessarily a booming line of business for us, but I think it just solidifies the offerings more and makes sure we can answer that question for people on that IRA issue.
Thank you.
But we had that very discussion internally
Yeah.
that you asked, just how much business, how much resource do you apply to this, that exact question.
Thanks.
Good for that one.
Other questions?
And we're on that one.
Then the ask would be if the board would like to sponsor, if there'd be a motion to that effect, and then.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of sponsoring this legislation, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Department of Finance is abstaining.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So on to the second proposal on investment procurement and travel. And this proposal seeks to strengthen our ability to reach full funding and to save fees through the collaborative model. Of course, you've been focused on the collaborative model and how we would be bringing external managers in-house. But another piece of it that is also very important is being a preferred partner in the investment space when we do work with external managers. So that's not going away entirely. And we need to be able to work with them in the best fashion possible. And so this bill would look to give the board authority over the procurement process and travel in the investment space. And it would make us more nimble and be able to be that preferred partner when we're working with external managers. Hurdles that exist right now with the state procurement process and the travel ban mean that we may miss out on some of the key institutional investors that we want to work with, the key investment managers and advisors that we want to work with, and then we lose out on those best investments with the best returns at the lowest costs. And that's what we're always looking for in order to pay benefits. And so with the authority, the board would be looking at parameters around those processes under your fiduciary duty. And so of course, that's a very high standard that you have to meet when you look at that. And that would provide, again, like I said, the ability to be flexible and make those connections with partners as quickly as possible. And on the travel side as well, I mean, we could be when we're seeking investment opportunities, but it's also for our due diligence with existing investments that we have in those states. It's also to represent our key views on corporate governance, diversity in boards and investment management, potentially at association meetings or conferences, but where we need to extend the knowledge that we have and the work we've done and make sure people are aware of those things. There's also opportunities for engagement in those states and research, especially if it's connected to any statutory requirements that we see come our way. We don't want to not have the ability to get there and find out what's really going on the ground, in person, face to face. And so again, with the board looking at setting those parameters, I just wanted to bring up, if the bill or the proposal were to move forward and we were to seek legislation, there could be concerns or opposition as they're outlined in the analysis before you. And those are along the lines of sensitivity that we're investing in states that have discriminatory laws, or that we may be limiting competition around those contracts that we're talking about in the investment space. So of course, to that end, if we move forward, we'll be talking with many people about the necessity of these changes and your fiduciary duty and what level that rises to. And of course, we'll talk to the key supporters of the travel ban when it moved through and the entities that oversee the procurement process right now.
And real quick, just to piggyback on the travel piece of it, it was really made real to me when Iowa was added as the 11th state, and I thought, well, we probably don't have a big footprint there, but it turns out one of our biggest real estate partners is in Iowa, and a large portion of our real estate holdings are in Texas as well. And if you're going to purchase an office building, just like if you're going to purchase a home, best to be able to go and check out the investment. So as the ban had it had exceptions for contracts that were already in place. But as we move forward, our real estate team has explained to me that part of their consideration moving forward will be, can we go to that state or not? So that sort of made it real to me.
Bill.
Thank you very much. I obviously, I think this is an important piece of legislation that we should move. And I think it's premised upon the concept of, what is our fiduciary duty here? And I'd like to maybe ask Brian to address that issue because, as fiduciaries, once again, our goal is to make sure the funding plan is reached and we take care of the benefits for our members. And to the extent that these restrictions impact our ability to maximize those goals, it seems to me that the law provides, is preventing us from really duly exercising our fiduciary duty to our members. Could you address that?
Actually, as to that last point, I think you're exactly correct. And what it does is it brings, it highlights the tension between your fiduciary duty and restrictions or laws of general application across the state or across departments. So you could have, and you do have, I think, individual instances where there is a fiduciary responsibility, because remember your staff are fiduciaries as well. There's a fiduciary responsibility to oversee an investment, and yet they're restricted from actually doing that activity. And then as Grant and Joycelyn mentioned, there are opportunities to best place the money to get the best return. And if those opportunities require travel that is prescripted by the statute, you do have a direct tension, because then you have to go for a less optimal investment, or you buy something sight unseen, because the restriction doesn't just say state employees can't travel. It says state funds can't be used for travel. So you can't even use a proxy to do that. So you couldn't say, okay, we'll hire an external fiduciary to go out and take a look at the property and report it back to us, because you can't do that either. So it does create a direct tension. And there could be a possibility, based upon your constitutional plenary authority and your constitutional duty to diversify your portfolio to maximize return, minimize risk, that you could have to, in an individual instance or overall, challenge the actual law. That could come up. So this is really the best way to approach this, to try to reconcile your fiduciary duty with the broadness of your portfolio across the country, and to recognize the political sensitivity, which is why I think the suggestion is to put, it's not just a blanket exemption. It is to put the responsibility on the board to adopt policies consistent with its fiduciary duty, and not just say staff can travel willy-nilly, but do they, we would be talking about it, but let's say, for example, do they meet certain criteria? Does the investment meet certain criteria? Do they really have to go there? Have they demonstrated a need? Is there, is there something just like, oh, we're just going to go wherever we want, we're going to ignore that? That's really, this is, I think, more carefully thought out. So it's a great question. I think that's actually where you are right now. You have this really visible tension that is increasing. As Grant mentioned, it grandparents in contracts before 2017, but it anticipates different types of contracts. It doesn't anticipate investment contracts. So I just think that there is an opportunity here for you to try to harmonize the state's public policy and your fiduciary duty.
Can I follow up? So if I understand you correctly, this is really not a meat hacking approach. This is a scalpel approach. And we're trying to, in a very thoughtful, balanced way, to have the law modified to permit us as fiduciaries to achieve what our goal is to maximize the benefits for our members and to, meet our funding plan. Is that, I mean, it's a really sensitive and thoughtful approach as opposed to a meat hacking approach.
I agree, and the reason is if you can analogize it to the California Constitution, the section that talks about your role. And it has a section in there that really recognizes that the legislature can pass bills limiting your ability to invest in something. But it adds in there, as long as it's consistent with your fiduciary duty. So there's already a recognition in the California Constitution that the legislature can act, it has the primary duty to act, but that your fiduciary duty is primary. So if you analogize that to this, you would say, okay, again, we follow whatever law is out there, law of general application, but is it consistent with your fiduciary duty? And that's the tension. So that's why it is, when those bills are like divest from some particular country or something like that, or don't invest, they always have that language in there as long as it's consistent with your fiduciary duty. And sometimes they require a finding by you that, okay, we need to do this because. And so, yeah, that is the scalpel approach. Is really, it's the board assuming responsibility as opposed to just a blanket statute.
And the law when it was passed, did provide exceptions, but we weren't part of that initial discussion. I think we probably could have made a good case at the time that our fiduciary needs are as strong as a football game or something else. So, I think we could have gotten into that discussion. So just exactly what you said, I think we're trying to be as narrow as the needs of this organization are relevant to this issue. So it's not about all of CalSTRS by any stretch. It's just very specific need around investments. That's it.
Thank you.
Keith.
Yeah, I think from the standpoint of our superintendent that we're going to oppose the travel aspect because that's a very significant policy decision. If the legislature moves forward and the governor signs the bill, we'll obviously live with that. At this point, though, we don't feel that moving forward with this particular policy change is one that we would like to support.
Bill, I have you in the queue again. Did you just?
No.
Okay. Want to make sure I got you. Gail.
Thank you. Thank you for this. And while I'll abstain from this, I do appreciate the surgical approach. I do wonder, though, for your team, Grant, if you'd want a little bit of flexibility if there were any administrative solutions as you're going through the process and learning more, especially on the procurement side. Sometimes administrative solutions go a little bit better than legislative solutions. So I was just wondering for you if you wanted some flexibility as you sponsor legislation to simultaneously pursue some administrative solutions. And I'm happy to work with you on that and look into it, just so you have kind of the most amount of flexibility and you're not wedded to a bill specifically. I didn't know if you thought that would be helpful.
I would say, anything that gets us to the finish line of where we need to get, we're open to. We did look at procurement a couple of years ago and sort of we looked at a lot of different options, and Chris is going to join me up here, and have decided that legislation is really what would be helpful, but go ahead, Chris.
Chris Hellman, Chief Investment Officer. With the last administration, we met with them. We put together a cross-division task force here at CalSTRS with procurement, legal, investments. I led it with Brian and with Lisa Blatnick. We spent 18 months. We met with DGS. We really looked at every facet within our project, and I was proud to say we were able to cut off 2 months, but that was 2 months off about a 14-month process or so, 13 months. So we still find that at this point, the best solution is a more holistic solution, and then coming back and having this board set the rules and guidelines. And we have done a survey of our peers at other state plans. We're certainly in the single-digit minority that have to follow traditional state procurement laws, or almost every other state plan has exemptions and operates quicker.
Any other committee members? So just to clarify, so what this legislation is asking is so that the board can make modifications to our policy to allow for the specific exemptions that we talked about for the collaborative model and travel, and but that's the board's role, is to be looking at modifying our policies on travel
And creating policy around
create a
that.
policy. Okay, got it.
I move adoption.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I have someone else in the queue real quick. Harry?
No, I'm supportive of the motion, so I
Okay.
won't speak. I don't need to speak any
Okay.
further to it.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So I've got one opposed. No, actually.
Two abstentions.
Okay, but one opposed and 2 abstentions, right? Good, great. Thank you. Thanks, Joycelyn. Thanks,
It's very quick.
Grant.
As for an update for 2019, I wanted to let you know the 2 bills that were signed after the September board meeting. AB 1452, and these are in your matrix that are toward the back of this section of your packet. It was our kind of second housekeeping bill last year about membership cleanup, and so that bill got signed. We're pleased with that. And then AB 1320 regarding divestment from Turkish investment vehicles was also signed. Now that bill only goes into effect if the federal government issues sanctions specifically related to Turkey not recognizing the Armenian genocide. And so although Turkey has been in the news a lot recently with sanctions and without sanctions, the sanctions haven't touched on this topic at this point in time. And so it's not going into effect until that happens. And so we, of course, have staff here that are monitoring that situation. And the bill does sunset in January 1st, 2025, if sanctions don't go into place. And I wanted to provide an update. It's a topic we've talked about before, and it connects to one of the bills on the list as well, on the charter school mandate and the interest that there is out there. There are groups that are continuing to discuss mandating teachers, administrators at charter schools into CalSTRS and CalPERS. Part of that discussion is also having charter schools set aside money as before they get it, in fact, through their apportionment, kind of putting a set aside so that the direct report source can pay their contributions and have money on hand to do that, especially in case a charter school goes out of business. And so the money is already set aside. It's almost like paying yourself first, but paying CalSTRS first in this case, so that people aren't stuck holding the bag, if you will, if something like that happens. Ongoing discussions, like I said, so we'll see what the conclusion is. I think Assemblymember Rodriguez is holding AB 462, which is also on your matrix, as a vehicle for that measure. Right now, it does have the emerging manager report language in it. That language also was in AB 181, which you'll notice is no longer on your list because that bill was gutted and amended, as we call it. The content was removed, and it was what was put into it had to do with hazardous waste, and Assemblymember Mainshine was the author of that bill toward the very end of session, and he moved that forward. So that bill's no longer out there, and AB 462 is awaiting on the Senate side, so in the second house, for any agreement there is on the charter school mandate and the paying ahead of contributions. And so there is time to get through that discussion because those bills probably don't have to move until summertime.
Lynn?
Joycelyn, thank you for the update on the charter school and specifically the piece related to the contributions and paying that ahead of time. So I know that right now it seems like there's a lot of huge conversations about charter schools in general, but do you think that if it doesn't go forward, there'd still be an opportunity to just concentrate on that piece?
I think so. I think that's a very mechanical piece, a logistical piece that I think is also very necessary, but it's not as wide-ranging as the mandate.
Right.
So I would be hopeful that we could do that.
Okay. And will you have another update at the January meeting?
I definitely will bring back what I have.
All right, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have any other questions or comments?
Excellent.
Great.
Well, thank you very
Thank you so
much.
much for the update. Appreciate it. Great. All right. We are going to move to item 5, which is the public comment framework. The continued conversation we had from our last board meeting, discussing how we are thoughtful about managing public comment, allowing the public to voice their thoughts and opinions while also being able to conduct our business effectively, which is always an ongoing challenge. So, Brian, and this is an action item.
Yeah, I do think that's a key consideration. So I wanted to be here with my colleague because we've worked pretty hard on trying to put this together, listening to your voice. And so you'll see the preamble of the rough draft regulation really tries to capture your voice and your dedication to transparency. But you also know from the experiences of last several board meetings that there needs to be some order. And a lot of the announcement that you're doing at the beginning of each meeting is really what is in the content of the regulation. There's a couple of legal things to keep in mind. Bagley-Keene is not really clear on public comment. It doesn't really have restrictions. It says that a member of the public can comment, prior to or during an item. It doesn't say for 3 minutes, for 10 minutes. There are some provisions that allow for removal of disruptive parties, but between those two, that continuum is pretty large. It's rare, though, that you get a body of law or a statutory scheme that actually invites you to adopt a regulation. So it is very rare, and there's language in the statute that says, you can adopt a regulation, and it says to ensure that the intent is to be carried out. But there's a case, there's some language from a case I usually don't like to read to you, but I'm afraid I'll get the quote wrong. It's Ribicoff versus City of Long Beach in 2018. And in that case, a member of the public challenged the 3-minute rule. And there was a 3-minute rule that the city had adopted through regulation. And Mr. Ribicoff wanted to speak, and he spoke for 3 minutes. Well, part of the regulation was you get a 3-minute shot at each item, and then you don't get to talk anymore. And so he claimed that it was interfered with his free speech rights, and it was an inappropriate regulation. And the court used language I think is really important for you. Although it was talking about the Brown Act, it's analogous to Bagley-Keene. It said, on the one hand, the legislature declared the importance of open governance and the people's right to participate, which you regularly recognize. And here's the key phrase, I think, for you. On the other, it validated enactment of limits on public speakers so that the business of government could function. And this brought into highlight, what's brought highlight to me on Wednesday. A great open meeting, people allowed to express their opinions, but you had an important action to take. And it was on your allocation, which is the most, as you've all said, is the most important thing that you do. And so it was unfettered public comment would have interfered with your ability to exercise your duty towards your constituents and towards the fund. So in that parameter, you have a legal invitation to adopt a regulation. Your peers have adopted similar regulations all across departments, cities, all across the state of California. You've expressed, I think, given us some points to move on. So that's sort of from a legal standpoint, at least. I think that there's much to support you adopting regulation. From a legal standpoint, I can't see a downside to doing it.
Yep. And I'll just, Madam Chair, you alluded to the fact that, I forgot to do this at the last item. Grant Boykin, Public Affairs Executive Officer. Sorry to those captioning our meeting. So you alluded to the fact that we had discussed in September possibilities. And so Brian and his team worked, if you look at TRB 70, on potential language that we would bring back to you in January, or modify it depending on the discussion here today, and initiate the rulemaking process. If you look at them, it really, to me, the time limits, the not allowing seating time, although that did happen this week, the requirement of the speaker request form to manage the comment period, the privacy issues and with respect to minors. It's all sort of the practices that we've been doing and putting into place probably since July, but what the regulation then would make it a, enforceable. And so I think if you look at TRB 70, we do, on the memo, there's sort of a highlighted bullet point list, but TRB 70 is really the language that we're looking at. So we're hoping to get feedback from you all, because this is really your regulation and describes how you would like to manage public comments at your meeting. Two things that I would add is, as Brian mentioned, we're trying to strike the right balance between allowing public access and participation and also making sure that you can do the job that you need to do in terms of having the meeting and dealing with your items. And then the other thing that, if you look at the regulations, Brian has built in a certain amount of discretion as well, so that they aren't so rigid that they couldn't be changed. So.
And I just, because you mentioned minor, that's still a work in progress. We're still looking at how we're dealing with minor comments. There have been some really distressing attacks on young people who have spoken up on the internet. And so we're working our way through that. A way to get perhaps parental consent. Can we do that digitally in some other way? Which is why we reference the privacy policy. So that way you're putting the regulation in place, but your privacy policy is going to evolve over time. You're going to decide how you're going to deal with your webcast and your web recording. So I did want to make that point because I think for some board members, that's still an active discussion item, is how we're going to treat all the members of the public who come in and how we're going to protect minors. So I didn't want anyone to get the idea that we were suggesting that you set that in stone in the law, but instead that you allow for the privacy policy to evolve, because we are all working on it.
Okay.
So I would thank the staff for the work to date. It's really helpful. For me, it's quite straightforward. I think Grant has done a nice job of talking about what we're trying to balance here. That is a public agency to conduct its business and the ability for the public to access that agency and speak openly and freely. I do think there is at times a misuse of the term freedom of speech. Freedom of speech and all of our freedoms are not absolute. They're limited in their scope and consistently upheld by the courts, that you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater because it jeopardizes the safety and well-being of the group. Clearly we have become a center of people gathering and using this forum and this boardroom to express their views and opinions on issues around specific topics. And that my sense is that press pushing the limits, and clearly we've seen examples of where we've been, our work has been disrupted and our ability to conduct our business. So I think the team is going to continue to be challenged across the organization as how we manage that so that we can get our work done. Having said that, I'm in support of the attached concept draft, and would ask that staff come back with the regulations in January 20, as outlined on TRB. The next steps is TRB 69. So I don't have any other amendments or suggested changes. I think it's well thought out, and it puts us in a better footing to enforce some of the approaches that we've put in place and now will have them documented, that provides us the added assurance that the actions we're taking does strike the right balance between our right to conduct the business of this board on behalf of the teachers of the system and the public to access us. So thank you. I don't think we're done with this, but I think this is moving the ball down the field.
Thanks. Dana.
So I definitely support moving forward with the regulations. I do have some comments and questions, Brian, on the regs that are listed, or proposed regs that are listed, I should say. even being close enough to this topic, when I first read B, matters within the subject matter of the board or committee that are not listed on the agenda, that seemed cumbersome. And I think that if we drop down to G, where it says, instead of being so verbose, it just says subject matter not listed on the agenda. I think if we can symbolize the language in B and F, to just read something like subject matter not listed on the agenda, I think it'd be more straightforward. So that's just a suggestion that I have. Or changing the wording from matters to maybe topics. On B, the very next sentence talks about non-agenda subject matter items. So I think it would be pretty self-explanatory. I think the matters within the subject matter not listed on the agenda is particularly cumbersome. On C and other parts of our policy, we're trying to get, I don't want to term it that way, that we're trying to to change our policy so that we don't have gender-specific pronouns. So on C, could we take out the gender-specific pronouns and just say, may not transfer unused time for public comment? I think that would be in line with the direction we're going in other policy. And that'd be my only comment.
I do want to respond, and I said before, I love you, so.
Absolutely, and it might be a legalese thing that I
But
just don't know.
I am going to at least give another view on the subject matter. So, one, we benchmark other regulations. The issue you're trying to deal with is if someone comes in and they want to talk about the presidential election. And so it's not within the subject matter of jurisdiction of the board. And so that's really the issue you're trying to address. So we will try to make it appear only once, because I think that's the other thing.
Brian, I don't want to, I think you might be misunderstanding me. I think it should say subject matter.
Okay.
I just think he's saying subject, or saying matters within the subject matter is unnecessary.
Okay.
I think it's for me, I don't like the matters matter.
That's why I love you.
So I think we can still say subject matter of the board or committee not listed on the agenda.
Yes, we can.
But I totally agree that it needs to be, I'm in agreement that each one of these regs that talks about the subject matter has to have that. So I do agree with that. It's just the matters within the matter.
I need to write better, it's really. Thank you.
Keith?
It's just a technical issue. The proposed draft 2511C talks about the public comment for each speaker being limited to 3 minutes per agenda item and during the general comment. And then there's a reference in D to the the presiding chair having the authority to limit or extend the amount of time allotted to any public comment period. And I was wondering if we should, or whether I missed that there is an amount of time that's allotted, overall speaking, public comment time per agenda item or general public comment on matters not on the agenda. We said 3 minutes for the personal comment period, but how about the allotted time? Was that intentional not to define it, or require us to define it within each meeting, every meeting?
It was intentional. It's a good question. It was intentional because of the organic nature of your meetings. And so just over the years of experience, sometimes you get to the end of the day and you'll have public comment, or in the middle of the day, you say, we're allotting this amount of time, but it's been kind of fluid. And I also think that sometimes you're aware, at least from my experience, you're aware that there's an issue on your agenda that folks want to come and talk to. I think that also happened in investments, and the chair said, okay, you can have this amount of time to address that. And if we made it prescriptive, although we would say at the discretion of the chair anyway, but if we made it prescriptive, it might be less flexible. That was the thinking anyway, is to allow it to be organic with your agenda.
If the chair has discretion to extend or perhaps reduce, because we only have one speaker who can only speak for 3 minutes anyway, and if there's 10 minutes allotted, then we don't use the 7 minutes. But it seems to imply that there is a time. So either we say that perhaps the chairs establish the allotted amount of time per agenda item and general comment, but then are allowed to extend or modify, whatever the discretionary authority. There should be some base to say that there is a discretion to extend or shorten. There should be some initial establishment, I think, of some base.
That's an excellent point, and we'll look at that if it pleases the board.
So Brian, can I?
Yes.
Well, like right now, we say, 10 minutes for public comment after each item, right?
Yes.
And so let's say we have two people that want to speak on this item in public, right? They each get 3 minutes each, and then when they're done, we're done. So that would be like the 6 minutes would be, right? So right now, we do kind of have and that's just something that we've,
Your policy.
our policy, we've said, okay, we're going to do 10 minutes for public comment after each item, 30 minutes of public comment at the end of the meeting for comments not related to agenda items. And that's just been kind of our practice for the last few meetings, right? So moving forward, I guess I'm trying to get to Keith's, would we still have that, the chair obviously would still have that discretion of being able to say, we've allotted this amount of time for each item, the 3 minutes, and then we can.
Yeah, I think, so to incorporate Keith's comment, I think really, if I can, is what the draft regulation talks about is the back end, is sort of you have discretion. But what Keith is I believe pointing out is we don't have the front end. We
Right.
don't say that the chair shall set the time, ahead of time what's on the agenda. We just give the chair discretion. So, I mean, it's a point, if you want to do that, if you want to say the amount of time should be set in the agenda and then have discretion to move it, as opposed to just trying to allow discretion a little bit more organically. I'm agnostic because I think it's ultimately you're going to set the time anyway.
I guess I'm just saying, we don't probably need a regulation moving forward to say at the beginning, we're going to allot 10 minutes after each agenda item for public comment, right? We can
It
just
would be best
say that.
practice to have a regulation.
Okay, all right. So that might be something to think about, because I hear what Keith is saying. I mean,
But I'm sorry.
setting expectations for everyone at the beginning seems helpful.
So I think I may not have answered your comment, and so I'm sorry. You don't need a regulation to do that if your regulation says that you have discretion to set the time for public
That's
comment.
my
That was your
point.
point. I'm sorry.
So Harry as chair can say, Sharon as, we can,
Yes.
as long as we say that at the beginning of the meeting, because I think the idea is to have expectations for everybody in the room to say, okay, this is how much time we're allotting. We might not use all that time, but that there's a sense of organization to the meeting so that expectations are clear. Is that fair, Keith? Yeah, go ahead. Punch in and one more time.
Or you can go back.
Can I, I don't know how, do I
Go to
go?
a previous
Speak
speaker.
now? There we go. Go ahead, Keith.
Just the expectations without a time period set, even if it's 10 minutes and 30 minutes, whatever. There could be taken an implication that, in fact, depending on the total number of people who show up, if 100 people show up and say, we want to speak, that we will accommodate that.
Oh.
If there's 10 minutes to speak or X minutes to speak in a general comment period, then with 30 minutes, then there's the discretionary authority is exercised from that 30 minutes either to extend or reject. So it's just a different, this is not a make or break thing, but
I
it's
got
just
it.
a policy thing. Well, what does the public expect coming
Right.
in?
That's yeah.
Yeah, I do
there's no
think,
mention of the time.
if I look down to subsection D, we do say that the chair may limit or extend the amount of time allotted to any public comment period. And so we could just put in there set.
Great.
And I think if we add that word, then I think we're fine. I think that
That's
captures.
a really good point.
I think that
To your point,
captures
what
the
we
settlement.
do right now is if there's a pool of people, we do the math basically and divide it up between groups and allot time.
Yeah, I'm,
Yeah.
it's just, if we're gonna say 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes and that's provides the base. But if everybody thinks that, well, we're gonna get the amount of time
Right.
because it's not set, we can have an hour because we're gonna have 200 people show up. That's
Right.
not our expectation. Our base
Correct.
is 10 minutes because we need to complete the business, or that's the amount of time. And in special cases, we'll extend it.
Discretion of the chair.
So it really is what is the expectation of the public? And if you say it's open, basically by not having a time period stated, you basically, it's almost an invitation to accommodate.
Right. Good, thank you. Thanks, Keith, that's good, and we'll make sure that word set is in item D. Thank you. Karen?
My question or comment refers to item H. You may have already touched upon it about the privacy policy. Is that a document, you said it's going to be fluid. Is it a document that's going to be separate from the regulation? How do we know what that policy is?
It will be. It will be a separate document be posted on the website that'll talk about that. When you draft regulations, there's really two ways to do it. One is to try to put everything in the regulation and then have to change it every time something changes.
Right.
And another is to really bring something in by reference that allows you then to change the reference document.
Yeah, I
And so
understand
since we really haven't hit a landing point on our privacy considerations, it is, it's best practice for us to try to adopt that. And that privacy policy will come back here for discussion as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay.
Gail?
I just have one minor question. In addition to Jay stopping a member of the public from speaking, did you want to provide maximum flexibility that the presiding chair may recess a meeting at any time? I know that's already allowed under Robert's rules, but because there's no allowance for that in this, I didn't know if it gets really disruptive at some, or there's an issue of safety, or everything you put in to Jay about impeding, but do we need to explicitly say the chair can recess at any time?
I think it's a great suggestion, even though the chair can do that. Putting it explicitly in the regulation, I think, is a great suggestion.
Thank you, Gail. Dana?
Going back to Keith's comments about having the base time set, in all fairness to the people that are coming to address us, and it's hard, and in recognition that it's hard until you know how many people are coming, and is it possible to set that base when the agendas go out?
That was certainly the way I interpreted that you would, the chair of the board or the chair of the committee, when they do the agenda, would set the time. And then it would be just like you do your agenda. You may have to be flexible on the day of the meeting. But I think that's part of your public notice requirement. So that certainly is
So
consistent.
speakers wouldn't have to necessarily wait to get here
To know that
to know what their base
there
time
were
was.
10 minutes base time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think public notice gives them an ample time to plan what they
10
want to
days.
do while they're here.
Just to clarify, so Diane and her team in External Affairs that help to manage things and take care of the request forms, they often, as much as they try ahead of time, they don't know until that day. So I think that
Right.
flexibility on the day is important.
Absolutely, I totally get that. Within the comments that we've been reading in the last couple minute meetings, and I just try to go through the regs quickly, we were talking about audio and visual recordings from a third party are not allowed. Did we cover that in these regs? We talk about it if they're disruptive, maybe limited or prohibited, but we don't talk about prohibiting audiovisual from a third party, I don't think, in any of these regs. Do we want to add that if they're not?
That's a great point. I think if you look at, I think the problem with NI is really a drafting problem. The idea was to capture that it may be limited or prohibited at the discretion of the presiding chair, and it really should be overall And then the disruptive is just another reason to do that. So we can straighten out that language in there. So the idea was to allow the chairs of the committee to make a decision, because sometimes people will come in with we tried different things. We tried size of posters, we tried different things, and it was just, you can't be flexible enough. So I think it really is, it can be reworded, and we can put it in the reverse order, that those things would be admitted based upon the discretion of the chair, and then one of the considerations is whether or not they'll be disruptive, so we don't have tons of barrels rolled in here.
And how about copyright infringement?
And the copyright infringement as well.
Thank you.
Harry?
I want to be very clear on my view on a specific issue around the filming and taping of minors and the institution taping and videotaping minors. I think we should not be permitting that to happen. Balancing how those images can be used to exploit children, and we are implicitly linked to that by permitting it to happen, versus a minor's ability to be videotaped. If they choose to videotape themselves and then broadcast it across the world, that is their choice. But for me, the balance between child safety and how they can be exploited, I think that someone could challenge us legally and say, how can you do that? I think the argument is we're erring on the side of child safety and exploitation, preventing child exploitation in the worst case scenario, versus worst case scenario is it's used, a video archive from CalSTRS is used in some child's images, used in a way that's harmful to him or her, and it's our tape. How do we defend ourselves against that? So I would encourage a really strong legal analysis that provides us the opportunity to say, we won't participate in the videotaping of children under any circumstances inside the boardroom. And I don't know if that's if there's a different view.
I just, the legal framework, I think you've heard me say this, is you webcast these meetings and you create the archive. It's a volitional act. You do that. It's permissive. You're not required to do that by law at all. You do it as a service to your members, those members that can't be here, to give as much public participation as possible, to create a record. It's really a good practice for transparency, and you're a leader. And I think that's wonderful. But there is no law that says you have to do that, and so therefore it remains in your discretion on how you want to use that. And then that's why we put in the regulation. However, Bagley-Keene says you cannot restrict someone else from videoing. So if there are members of the public that want to create their own video record, want to live stream the meeting, want to do whatever it is that they want to do, it doesn't restrict their ability to express themselves or to do that. And the other thing is a point, and I think you make it very clearly when you talk about this, is no one is saying that anybody can't address the board or the committees, which is the legal requirement. So I'm just sort of emphasizing, when they step up to the microphone, no one says you can't speak. It really is controlling the images that you produce. So that's sort of the legal framework. So we've heard you loud and clear.
Thanks, Brian. We've got 2 more speakers from the board, and then I know we have a couple of members for the public before we vote. I kind of want us to move forward on this. So, Gail?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, for maximum security, Brian, in I, do we need to specifically state that the items can be confiscated and subject to search for security reasons?